quick presentation. Well, I say quick, maybe it is around half an hour, 40 minutes, but just about some of the work I've done, and the sort of journey I've had so far. Still relatively young, but I don't know. I've been freelancing for a few years, and doing type as well. So I'll just go through some of that stuff. My practice is trying to sort of strike a balance between graphic design and type design. I got into type design through graphic design. But yeah, more recently, it's definitely tipping more into type design direction. So I'm trying to find an equilibrium between the two, because I think both feed off each other well. And to be a type designer that's also a practicing graphic designer, I think it's quite important, because, you know, at the end of the day, you're creating tools for other graphic designers. So to keep a strong foothold in that world is pretty important. I started, I studied at Kingston School of Art, graduated in 2017. And there wasn't much in the way in regard to type design education. It was definitely more like conceptual ideas, a lot of group projects. So it was really trying to understand that more conceptual way of thinking. But I was really always quite interested in the more nerdy sort of graphic design and type design. So any place that I could do that within projects, I sort of tried. So I think the first introduction to type was just doing this like cover lettering as a group project. And I quite like the challenge of, or like these type parameters that you had within type design. You know, for all the conceptual ideas were so like vast, but type design is so narrow in what you can do. You know, at the end of the day, an A has to sort of look like an A. And working within those type parameters was quite interesting. It almost felt like sort of guilty, like that I wasn't. I don't know. It felt like something I shouldn't be doing in a way. You know, that we had all these crazy ideas and stuff, and then you're doing something so controlled and refined. It felt a bit naughty, and I like that. So in third year, I developed that into like a first uppercase sort of typeface, and that kind of gave me the bug to start doing it in my own time. So it was very much, I was self-taught after graduating, just experimenting with stuff. Then I moved to Munich, and interned at Bureau Borsche, and sort of integrated into that Bavarian lifestyle of beer gardens and heavy drinking. But yeah, it was a great opportunity as well to work on range of projects and starting to do type more as well. So getting the chance to work on some projects, and I definitely started to move towards the typographic sort of projects, so logos and letterings. But I had definitely like a digital first approach by not having this formal type design education, maybe that, you know, you learn from the calligraphy and everything, but I had a very digital first approach, which maybe made things look a little bit different at the time. Not entirely sure, but I got a chance to work on some few things. So this was like a tonic and design book, where the lettering on the front sort of evokes these bent wooden frames for the chairs. Some other projects, these sort of books I was working on. Since haven't actually done any editorial since going freelance, but this is all I've got in that department. And then, at the same time, I was working at the office. I was spending evenings and weekends on my own sort of projects. So I started out just sort of posting stuff on Instagram and doing a few small commissioned digital artworks, and that sort of snowballed gradually over those couple of years. I was at Bureau Borsche into some record sleeves and other letterings and stuff. There's this like wild typography I was doing at the time. Like I said, this sort of digital first approach where everything, you know, it's very Bezier curve heavy, psychedelic and alien-like sort of work. But then I tried doing my own typeface, which was Monarch, and yeah, I showed these sketches because they're just awful, I think. Like it shows that I just didn't understand like letter construction at the time, but it didn't stop me from sort of publishing stuff. And maybe if I thought too much about it at the time, I would have been too scared to sort of just get stuck in and start designing fonts and releasing them. So it's definitely been a long learning experience. So that was Monarch that I released in 2017, I think. Yeah, there's a lot to say about it, but it definitely kind of encapsulated maybe this aesthetic at the time. And there's still within there like a strong character or something, even though it is a bit rough around the edges and there's just weird oddities like the X having like zero contrast compared to the other letters. There's just weird things that were in there. But it was just, I was just learning on the go and whilst I went along. And yeah, I started licensing the fonts as well. I'd never really thought about selling fonts at the time, so the whole type world was quite new to me. So it was only when I started posting stuff online and people were interested that I started selling font licenses, and then actually starting to see it in the world being used by other designers was a huge motivation as well to get to start doing it a bit more and see how people use your type and these tools you make in totally different ways. Yeah, as the years went on as well, I sort of went back to older designs. So when I started learning a bit more about it and understanding the letter forms and proportions and stuff, I would take that knowledge and I created like an update on Monarch. Also worked with Margot Levesque. She helped me with some production work on this one. But I think it's always good to sort of revisit some of the old projects as well and update them for the years to come, so they're a bit more hardy in that sense. So yeah, I was doing more sort of record sleeves. I think there was definitely split between doing the type design on one side and more design for music, record sleeves and stuff like that. And then again, you also have this sort of type parameters on what you can do within a sort of record sleeve. And yeah, at 2019, I moved to Rotterdam. So I finished up at Bureau Borge, already worked there, I think, about a year and a half. I also met my girlfriend who lived in Rotterdam, and you know, I was getting to that point where the freelance work and the type stuff was starting to outweigh at least the commitment I could do at the office. So I started freelancing full time, which was, yeah, a big change, of course. Then I could manage time myself, but then I missed as well that studio culture that I really liked in the office. But then I could really sort of sink time into all the projects I was really interested in. So I set up, after a while, Wise Type, which is just a sort of type foundry for my own typefaces, and that grew quite organically from just sort of out of necessity of trying to automate the whole administration thing of trying to license the fonts. I'd never really planned a type foundry, and there was never any real sort of like hard launch of this big idea and concept. It sort of just gradually grew over those couple of years, and that's something I'm still working on in my free time, but trying, you know, in the future now to see it as more of a serious type foundry. So I'll be trying to add to that in the years to come, and also collaborating with other designers and friends to sort of expand that. So when I started freelancing, I did a few interesting projects here and there. This one I'll talk about. It's quite a fun one. Someone approached me about starting out like a music label. We named it Clunk. Don't know why, but it just sounded nice. And for this first release, he wanted something a bit crazy. So I came up with this idea as to have like the first wearable record sleeve hat. As far as I knew, it didn't exist yet. So yeah, we went ahead and did it. So the rest of the sleeve and the record was all blank, sort of transparent vinyl, you know, white label, everything sort of anti-design. But then the whole design itself was in this cap. And that was inspired by this documentary I saw at the time. It was the 50th year anniversary of Apollo 11 missions, and they had these weird looking cardboard hats to block out the sun. And yeah, I found some scans of that, and it fit perfectly within that 12-inch sleeve. So did some mock-ups with that, just seeing how it would work and fit. And then we also took it a step further. So these are some really rough shit drawings, but took some photos as well, tried to do a bit of art direction around it. I've always been a massive fan of Devo and this kind of unhinged aesthetic that they had. So I definitely borrowed a bit of that for some of the photos we took as well, and sort of creating this world around Clunk. I think it only did about 2 releases before before COVID hit, and many sort of small time record labels sort of ceased to exist. Did a lot more logos as well, so some commissioned work. So this one was for Crane, the paper manufacturer, working with Collins Agency, and doing custom wordmark based on Monarch Nova. And yeah, I did in those couple of years since 2019 quite a few sort of logos and word marks, some bigger clients. That was always a shock for me. So I did a couple of shoes as well with so this one was Versace Trigreccia. I don't know how it's pronounced. And also one for Louis Vuitton, which it's I'm not really into the high fashion world, so I don't know a lot about it. But I'm really happy that I managed to work on these two. I've never actually seen them in the wild, actually. And you know, when I did inquire about maybe a free pair, I did get a few blank messages. So at least I have these relatively high res images to put on my website, and that's good enough for me. Some quite a few record sleeves as well. Like I said, I really enjoyed doing those. This one was with Alex McCullough. We did a couple together from Whitey's Records. I think it's now called 1893. Just some hidden little things in here, like the symbol on the front was a universal plug socket. I don't think anyone ever picked up on that, but there's like a hidden Easter egg into that. And I don't know, it was a very ethereal, universal sort of concept with this one release. And a few for Planet New Records as well. And with that client, usually they're given the option if they want to do the record sleeve themselves with friends, and then if not, they just hand it over to me and I do my best with that. Another one for URAF, United Ravers Against Fascism, with Live from Earth. And that was a whole campaign with a compilation cassette and some T-shirts as well. So got some nice images from that. And then COVID hit. Yeah, so that sucked. And of course it sucked for everyone. Yeah. And the silver lining, although there isn't much silver lining in it, is that gave me a bit of time to focus more on type. So a lot of like I was saying, these record labels, a lot of the music industry work was decreasing during those years. So I just shift focus onto doing type design, and really getting stuck into it and trying to teach myself a bit more. And yeah, that was a bit of a blessing because it just gave me that sort of block of time to really get, go deeper down the rabbit hole. So I was working on this was like my first serif typeface, heavily inspired by Times New Roman. And it was definitely like an exercise for myself in trying to understand, okay, how can you, I've done a few display fonts, but how can you make something that's just slightly more legible? And then I noticed that there's definitely like a higher sort of, or that there's far more effort required to make something actually legible rather than, doing some crazy letterings or something. But I also like the challenge of that and trying to get further into that. So yeah, this one was Cormalink. Another one, Saltburn, which was my first serif. Sans design. This typeface was based on national railway identities. So I always like I thought it was funny that you had a national railway identity that has almost zero national identity. They all sort of have this singular modernist approach. And that became the sort of little narrative behind the typeface. I mean, it does have a lot of character, but I sort of imbued it with pictograms and typable trains and everything to sort of reinforce that the whole narrative behind it. And it was definitely like the most or the largest typeface I'd worked on to date. So it was my first time doing variable font as well and trying to learn how that works and, interpolating between different masters and all the errors that can go wrong. And rather than finishing the typeface, I would just carry on and start adding weird glyphs that no one would ever use. And yeah, what I realized as well over the years is maybe the projects that you spend the most time on really sort of putting your all into it are always or could be the ones that are the least successful. So this is today definitely like the least successful, but the project, but the one that I spent the most amount of time for, and the ones that are a bit off the cuff, like the first one I started, Monarch, are like the top sellers still. And but it's always a risk of which sort of draft to take forward, and I tend not to care too much about like which one might be the most profitable, but at least just the one that I'm enjoying the most at the time. And this project I took a step further as well for the presentation and the specimen as well. So with this, I wanted to do something to do with railways for the launch. So then I bought like a scale model train and got some decals printed and put them on the train as well. A few people I talked to thought that it was all Photoshop, but it is legit, like a little train that I brought along to Mini World in Rotterdam here, which is great. I would strongly advise you to visit if you're ever in Rotterdam.
I thought you built the whole set, as in like.
Oh God, no. Wow, that would have been really, quite the time investment. No, luckily we have a local mini world around here, so I rang them up and asked if it was possible. So a friend of mine, we went together and we shot it there, and they got like a 24-minute day-night cycle. So you had about 12 minutes daylight, 12 minutes nighttime. So you had to kind of work quick, get the golden hour shots in there. But that was quite fun to do. I always like seeing how you can maybe push it one step further. Another one I did was Zaft 2, confusionally named after Zaft 1, which I did a few years ago, and then I realized that by sort of curving the corners and giving it this kind of bell-bottom 60s psychedelic effect, it would be quite a nice sort of extension on it. So with this one, I worked with a friend, Celine Herker, who's another type designer based in Den Haag. And we worked together back and forth on this, but she really pushed it further and expanded it into like a series of 3 variable fonts, all doing a kind of weird movement. So variable A had the weight shifting from the bottom serifs to the top. variable B had sort of independent serif movement with the counters. And then variable C was sort of a combination of both of them going even more hectic. And it was interesting to see how this typeface, which sort of has its roots in the sort of Western genre of typefaces and this 60 psychedelia, but you're putting it through this sort of contemporary lens, and then also experimenting with the variable font technology. And then again, trying to build in some other glyphs, so like a typable ornament, knots, to sort of link back to this Western theme. And then, yeah, a few years ago, I started getting really into, wanting to be able to design like a good text typeface. And I started doing a lot of reading as well on especially like the Dutch type design history in the past 100 or so years. And there's a few designers like Jan van Krimpen and Bram de Does who just designed some really beautiful text typefaces. And I got the idea that I really wanted to design a text typeface, but I didn't really have the knowledge or that formal sort of training. Not that you really need it, but I sort of felt that if I wanted to do type design as, in the long term, that I really wanted to learn more. And that's when I found out about this course, Type and Media, in The Hague. And that's like a specialized type design course. So I applied to that and was lucky enough to get into that. And that set me on the journey of trying to understand the sort of logic and all the considerations behind designing for text. So these were some of the inspiration as well. These were drawings by Bram de Does for photo lettering. And I just thought, when I first saw these, I was so blown away by the beauty within them, that these are all, hand done, inked, I think maybe with sort of like an X height of 7 centimeters or something, just perfect. Also having this process of drawing from sketching is something that I was also missing within my process, and something I really looked up to. So I started trying to work that a bit more into my process, especially when sort of applying to this course, and starting to go back and learn from calligraphy again. So I've never picked up calligraphy pen or a flat nib pen or anything, but it was helpful in understanding where the thicks and the thins are, and sort of letter proportion. And then started trying to integrate letter drawing or type drawing more into my process, because one thing I found that if you start from a digital first approach, I mean, it's great for the letterings and stuff, and I really like all that work I was doing, but especially for this text type area of type design, there's certain like curves that you can't really achieve if you go straight from a sort of digital first approach. So drawing by hand and sort of getting that more organic curvature into things, and then scanning later on, just seems to be a far, just the quality is far better. I mean, these are older sketches, so I'm not too fond of them, but this was me on the course last year. Oh, was it last? No, it's 2 years ago already. Shit. The time's gone fast, but it's just a real small group of 12 proper type nerds from across the world, and everyone had come together to just design type for a year. So it was a bit of a risk in terms of my career in a way, because one side, I was learning the ins and outs of it and really going deep down the rabbit hole that will benefit me in the future. But I did have to put everything on hold for 1 year. So all the freelance, everything sort of had to shift. And then, just a few slides on that year as well. So there was, going back to calligraphy again, also the sort of technology and the science behind legibility and how your eye works, and I don't know, just bonkers stuff. Like you can go this is like as deep down the rabbit hole as I think I ever want to fall. But yeah, it was great. And also, I've always been fascinated by history as well. So there was a whole module on revival type, which I found really interesting. So we had to find like a book printed before 1940 or something, and then use it as a guide to create a revival. So I found a book from, I think, like the 1650s or something, and did my revival based on that. We also had a contrast assignment. So just one quick project where we learnt, how to create a family which deals with contrast, so like a high contrast, but then a low contrast version, and then all weights. So this course was extremely intense, I have to say. Like, it used to be a 2-year course, and I condensed it into 1 year. So it was definitely like the closest I'd ever come to a burnout. So I did have to take some time off type design for a bit after that. So yeah, a lot of type drawing and stuff, and using that a bit more into the process. And I don't know, judging everything by eye as well, not relying too much on sort of mathematical purity within your designs, but really proofing and judging everything by eye was definitely something I took away from it as well. And we got the chance to go to a load of archives and see, a range of books and punches and all sorts of typographic ephemera. And at last, I did get to see those drawings that I really loved, or had motivated me to start that sort of journey in the first place. So there's like my tutor pointing out some more detail in a really unflattering photo of myself staring and trying to understand. And yeah, this within the revival project, we had to sort of organize our scans of the pages into the different letters, and then you could trace around it on the computer. But within my process, I found that you kind of lost a bit of that human touch to it. The fun for me is always the sort of drawing aspect, and with this revival project, just tracing around an existing font just seemed, I don't know, a bit boring. So within this process, I was trying to imitate like how this punch cutter would have worked. And when punch cutters used to carve onto the end of like a steel bar, everything would have to be in reverse as well. So I like the idea of that when you draw in reverse, you sort of forget your preconceived idea of how maybe a letter would look, and you sort of judge it a bit more on proportion and weight and distribution. And I thought of it like if you'd ever, done a portrait or a self-portrait, and it looks all right, and then you hold it up in a mirror, and you automatically see how wonky everything looks. So my idea was that maybe these punch cutters were, they had such quality as well because they were able to work in mirror image in a way. So they're just focusing on that sort of balance of letter form. So within that, I was sort of trying to imitate that. So I'd sketch it always in reverse on top of some printouts, and then draw in reverse as well. So, these punch cutters they weren't building the letter out, but they were carving towards like a final form. So I was also seeing, like, testing how you could sort of work that into a process. This is a project that's still very much in progress. I mean, pretty much all the projects we did during that year are sort of just springboards to carry on because there's just not enough time. But it's definitely something I'm looking to work on in the years to come as well. There was also like an accompanying essay as well, diving deep into the history. It was really interesting. And then stone carving as well. That was great fun because something I'd never really tried before. And that gives you definitely a new sort of appreciation for at least like another technique, but also understanding how you might have to modify certain letters to work within a 3D space. So like one of our tutors, she she's in her 70s, has been carving like her whole life. And she was saying about when she was commissioned to carve into the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And there was a logo type created by Irma Boom, which was definitely not made for carving first. So she had to like create all these small differences, or you had to sort of modify it to work within that geometry, that three-dimensional space. So that was also like an interesting thing I hadn't really thought about before. Haven't got the chance to do it again, unfortunately, because it kicks up so much of this like marble dust that you have to be somewhere independent of all electronic devices. And I think my neighbors would be driven a bit crazy as well. So I have to find some time or some space to try and do that again. And then, yeah, my graduation project, which was like a 4-month sprint, was designing a text typeface. So I think I was the only one in the class who knew directly from the start that all I wanted to do was like a really boring text typeface, and everyone else was doing sort of wild, crazy, fun things with coding and stuff. But what I wanted out of this year was just to try and figure out how on earth can I design something that has enough sort of interest when you're reading it that your eye's not going to sort of wander off the page, but doesn't have too much character that it's sort of irksome when you're reading it, and then also has that sort of even color and everything. I don't know, just the sort of challenge of that was something I really enjoyed. So I went through a massive process from sketching at the start, and I had bought an iPad by that point. So I started using Procreate as well. And that was a super handy tool as well, because, you know, with Procreate, you can get this liquefy effect as well, and you can sort of nudge the letter form as well and create really subtle differences or alterations that may be far harder when you're working just with Bezier curves, you know, like shifting a couple of points this way or that way. So I definitely started to use that more in the project. And this was the result from the 4 months, which is Gablet, my typeface, which is definitely still a work in progress. But yeah, I wanted something that would also work maybe more in this sort of complicated typographic setting. So I was really interested in, you know, bibliographies and the really intricate, complicated typography where you have small caps with italics, maybe with bold, and getting everything to have this even color in there. And there's so many subtle optical adjustments that need doing to sort of make that possible. So, you know, like the italic being slightly lighter, but doing all these like interpolation tests with an italic to try and identify like the right weight. Also seeing like the height of the italic next to the Roman, because usually it might have to push it a little bit higher on the X height. I mean, all this total nerd shit to make it work, which maybe, yeah, to most people, they might not see, but at least when you get that deep down into it, are real considerations that you have to make in it. So yeah, this, like I said, it's still a work in progress. And already after I graduated last year, I think I redrew it about 2 times already. So it's definitely, I don't know. I think this project will kill me in a few years. I keep setting online like, oh yeah, it'll be done this year, and then another year passes. So, but I'm also in no rush as well. It's something, you know, I think having fresh eyes on it, coming back to it every few months or something is good as well. So since graduating last summer, so yeah, I've been getting back into some projects as well, slowly getting a few freelance jobs in again, and with the plan to sort of almost relaunch my Foundry WiseType in the years to come, and trying to grow that a little bit more. So working with a few other designers as well, yeah, I'm seeing how it goes. And currently I'm working on an update of Scrapper, which is this, yeah, this typeface here. It started out just as a condensed typeface, based on First Things First manifesto, which yeah, was this manifesto that had this amazing lettering by Ken Garland. And I really like this sort of geometric condensed letterings that you saw a lot in the 60s, really systematic. So I definitely took a lot of influence from that. Also, Wim Crowell did some, but it definitely took on its own sort of character in the end. I released that, I think, 2019 or something. So it's been out in the world for quite a while. So it's nice to already see how people are using it and what it's being used for. So it's in already like a couple of architectural books, and that's also like a nice, gives me a nice idea of like how with the update I can maybe put a bit more of that theme into it as well. A few years ago, I was contacted by an art director from the Utah Jazz, this NBA team, and that was working on a custom cut of Scrapper for their 2020 to 21 season. So that was the first time that I really thought about the design space of Scrapper. So it just started out as this condensed, and then yeah, they wanted this really hyper extended sort of version, or hyper extended. It's just a little bit more extended, I guess. But I did revisit that this year and redrew it completely. So it's become like its own thing, and yeah, that's something that's still in the works, set to be released in a few months, although I'm not going to advertise that because I'm horrible at meeting my own deadlines. And some other sort of quirky ones in the work at the moment. So this one is Spiral, and earlier this year I came across this lettering. Well, I thought it was lettering at the time for this record sleeve from the 70s. Couldn't identify the font. I really like this weird sort of spaghetti looping effect that they have in it, and the whole system. Thought was really impressive. So I started working on a sort of an interpretation of that, but also setting it up straight away into design space. So, you know, having I guess a bold and then a hairline and seeing where it goes. And someone found the source of it. So it was released by Mechanorma in the 70s by this guy here, Francois Ducinti. And it's quite nice. Like he had entered in this design into a competition for that. Mechanorma started in the 70s, where you could propose an idea for a new letraset font, and his was included into it. I can't find anything on Francois at all afterwards. I'm not sure if he became really a type designer or this was just a one-off or is graphic designer, but yeah, it's nice also to find out about the source. There is no digital version yet, so it's quite nice to actually get this into the world and allow other designers to start using it. But I'd already started it, and it was interesting then to see certain letters that were totally different to how I might have approached it. So there were certain things in like the G and the K that I don't know, I wasn't too fond of. Other things I really liked. So it's been a sort of push and pull of where to push it at the moment. It's still really early on, but this is the state of it at the moment. So did some, you know, going for a sort of different G and K, and I don't know, trying to find a little more system within the typeface, and going to town on some of these numerals as well. And then, of course, having open type technology, we can have all these ligatures, and that lends in really nice into you know, into creating like a more contemporary version of it. So that's very much work in progress, but something else I'm working on. And then again, yeah, like I said, trying to work on a sort of Foundry relaunch in the year to come. So this past year has just been hectic with doing a lot of stuff that isn't type design as well. So, you know, rewriting stuff like licensing agreements and really boring stuff that I don't like so much, but is also essential in running a type Foundry and also trying to treat it as more of a sort of entity or business in the future as well. So hopefully that sort of admin stuff will soon be finished, although I know for sure it won't be. And then I'll have a bit more time to focus on sort of type design as well. Yeah, these are a few last letters. And yeah, I think that's it. So that's me up to now. Yeah, those are my websites as well. Yeah, well, thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Anyone want to start with anything?
I've got one, but you go first. There you go. I mean, it's more of a quite broad question, maybe, but yeah. Firstly, thanks for that. That was really, really cool. It was great to see kind of your journey. I guess kind of a broad question was kind of what's been the biggest challenges with what you're doing? Because I know, like you said, you obviously started graphic design, then got into type design, now full whack on type design. Is there something you find with getting into type design that is quite a hurdle? I don't know. Was there something in that process where you thought, actually, this is not worth it, or I don't know, not seeing that vision of it?
I think maybe that it's almost as much challenge as you want to give yourself in a way, because, you know, when I started, I wasn't interested in text typefaces at all, of course, but the more I got into it, the more I saw just how broad that world is and just how deep into it you can get. And I think, you know, going to type and media, that was as deep as I maybe ever want to fall into type design.
Never again.
So a bit of PTSD coming out the other side, thinking, oh God, I need to, yeah, see where I go from here. Not that I never wanted to just become just a type designer as well. So yeah, trying to recalibrate that a bit, or have a bit of time, leave a bit of time for graphic design as well. But I think you can easily fall just into doing type as well. But yeah, in regard to the challenge, I mean, yeah, when I started to make more legible fonts, that's where the challenge really began, I think, because that learning curve is so steep between doing letterings and logo works and sort of display fonts. You know, with the logo, you can let one letter have a lot of character or something, but trying to make something legible in text, like I was saying, everything has to kind of be nudged in an equal way. So I saw that it was like a totally different ballpark, going into like more of that sort of text type area of type design. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, also just to echo James and Ed, the whole like storytelling, your journey was just brilliant to like hear, actually. So thank you for looking through that. My question was with I might butcher it. Is it the type text or the letter text?
Maybe introduce what you do.
Yeah, I'm not the designer in the room, I'm the strategist, so I don't. The terminology is a bit new to me. But is it the letter text you worked on in the your field media type of media thing? So
what was it? Sorry, what was that?
The bit of the letter text or type text that you've developed off the back of your course, one that you spent, I think, a year on, and you were sort of coming back to and refining. I was curious to know, like, when you come back to it, what are you seeing that's new or that you need to kind of resolve? And is it not potentially one of those sort of like infinite things of it will never be right in a way?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when it's done?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's something I also asked to my tutors 2 years ago, who, you know, they've all been type designers since the birth of digital type design, and from the 70s onwards. So, and it was actually quite nice to hear that even huge typefaces like default fonts or something, like no type designer will ever consider them to be a finished thing. They're always sort of a work in progress. But it is totally up to you when you think, okay, is this now done? And I think looking back on the project Gablet, that text typeface I was working on, it was good to have, I think, about 4 or 5 months break from it, and then I came back to it. And having that time away from not seeing it, when you get so used to a design, it's good to sort of have a fresh pair of eyes, whether that's someone else sort of judging it and giving feedback on it. So when I saw it after that time, I noticed just things that were niggling at me enough that I thought, okay, if some of the times, like if there's something's niggling you enough, that niggle's only going to get bigger and bigger in the future, and you might not be satisfied in a few years' time. And one thing I've found is that with pretty much all the typefaces I've released, after a year or so, I start to see like a lot of things that I'd want to change and stuff. And that is like a dangerous game of reworking existing fonts and never creating anything new. So I had to, at one point, put a stop to it. But the thing that I tend to do is I like the drawing part of it the most. I think, of course, that's like the most fun part. But then there's maybe that's 10% or 20% of the work, and the rest is spacing it and kerning it and writing particular code for how different alternatives would work based on context, and stuff that is a little bit less interesting. So I find like the typeface just gets bigger and bigger, and then the work exponentially increases, and then you decide, oh, maybe I'll add like another axis onto it, so like an optical axis where the ink traps grow larger. It's a little bit less condensed or something to work better in text, and then you kind of like multiply the amount of work onto it. So
I feel like we can have this. I feel like we can have the same meeting in 30 years, and this is what could still be the one that hasn't been published.
I know it. I mean, sometimes I still see my tutors. I mean, because Den Haag is pretty close by Rotterdam, so I go visit every now and then. And I keep mentioning, still working on Gablet, and my tutor's always laughing like, this thing's going to kill you. You're never going to be finished with it. But yeah, we'll see. Well, hopefully in the end. And I know for sure that it's when I release it, it'll probably be a little bit. Well, it won't be very popular, I think. Who cares?
I also like when you were talking through like how deep down the rabbit hole you've gone on your course. I was trying to envisage what the tutors like if you're going down a rabbit hole, like how far of a rabbit hole the tutor's gone down, and just like what do they like to like hang out with? They just like so intensely in. That's the whole conversation.
Riddled with anxiety from just walking through just general high streets and looking at type.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely attracts sort of peculiar people. That's for sure. They, I mean, like I said, 12 nerds and tutors that are also nerds. So yeah, there's maybe. It does get intense at times, and sometimes when I hang out, then the only thing we're talking about is type, and I at some point you think maybe the world is a little bit bigger than this small bubble that we find ourselves in.
It does sound like an interesting but very niche Netflix documentary.
Yeah. But it's interesting to. Oh yeah, sorry, okay.
And I was going to just ask you one quick question, because one part that for me was really interesting is the fact that you studied at Kingston. And actually in the early days of when I started this practice, I had a very keen eye on seeing who was coming out of Kingston because of the fact that they were so nonconformist in the way in which they approached their curriculum. Like, always so obscure. You'd always, the kind of people who came out of there would never kind of follow the traditional paths of what we know a graphic design course to be. And whether it be just the name of the course or just generally people completely going in such a completely different direction to what you would probably be traditionally thinking of doing. It was always super interesting, but really maybe a semi-boring question, but how influential do you believe your work at Kingston was to how kind of, I use this word too much in the studio, how curious you've become to create almost slightly non-traditional typographic characters in the early stage of your career, and then obviously now revisiting it after your timely death of your after your typeface release?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think at the time when I was on the course, a few of my friends, we were always a little bit bitter and rebellious because all the projects were so conceptually driven, and it was a lot of stunt-based work as well. Like his project would be, I think someone's project was, I can't remember what it was, but it essentially involved him for the first time running up a wall and trying to do a backflip, and he had like a whole event for it and everything. So I don't know, it was just like wild ideas, but I also really like humor as well and trying to instill that into it. So I think it was like a really good match. But just after graduating and I got into type design, then I was all bitter like an angsty teenager, thinking, oh, they didn't teach me how to draw proper letters or do actual graphic design. But it's only upon reflection a little further down the line that I realized just how beneficial I think it was. And all the other stuff you can pick up and learn yourself, I think. And having that sort of maybe slightly non-traditional approach to things has definitely helped. And I see it also with other friends of mine who there's always sort of humor that permeates everything they're doing. And I think it was really beneficial. And I don't think I would have changed it now. I do know, I think in past years, the sort of type design has gotten really good at the school as well. Seb from works at Dynamo. What's the name? Seb.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, no, he's really great. I've met him a couple of times, and he's really inspired like a new generation of type designers there. And I think they definitely have that sort of conceptual understanding as well.
It is interesting though, because the education system now is almost quite linear. I think that when I was back at university in 1942, the PAB was 1936, so we're fine. Your typeface, your book from 1630 was actually written by Pab Star. No, I joke, it was 1652. The interesting thing when I was studying was the fact that we were encouraged not to stick to one bachelor degree. So the way in which we were kind of educated or forced into curriculum was the fact that we were actually encouraged to switch courses. So actually, we ended up doing is that the graphic design course, their final major project was actually a fine art piece instead. And it kind of ended up switching between these different disciplines, which really gave you it ended up, I suppose, changing the way in which you thought about things rather than thinking about it from design first. It was more, what is the idea and how do you bring that to life? I think that there is a little bit of a sense now where being inspired, especially as a young designer, and just seeing all of the noise that you can see through digital technologies, what's really kind of beautiful about what you just showed was the fact that the inspiration for you came from sources that were not necessarily of now, but there was a research, there was almost a desire to have a sense of resurgence of things that maybe were underappreciated from something from way back. That spiral typeface, interestingly enough.
Story of that, so amazing.
Yeah.
Just finding the original.
Well, yeah, because but I always wonder, like, just again, maybe I'll keep this quite short. What comes first, the curiosity or the reference? Like, as in, are you driven to go and find something, which then inspires something, or have you got an idea of what you want to do and then you go out and find the reference? Sorry for a deep question at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, that is deep. Maybe it's a mix of both, I think.
Okay.
Like seeing the reference material, sometimes you sort of get an instant click, like, that you see something in it, or it's but then the curiosity comes in to think, like, how can you push it and put your own stamp on it? So there's always this question with source material in type design. Type design is always a sort of, everything is based on something else that came before it. It's always this sort of continuation. And you can, just do a straight revival of something, but the curiosity part is always seeing, like, what else can you do with it? What interesting thing can you spin on this that is going to make it different from what came in the past? Yeah. Did that answer it?
that was a good enough answer. We'll debate it another time when it's not the time it is.
Sounds like the sort of question you might have to answer with all your tutors.
It sounds like something I'd like to be, which is quite worrying.
I was just slide in one sort of last comment / question. I think it was really interesting in a lot of the typefaces, it's always the little kind of icons or motifs that you seem to drop it. Yeah, that you drop in there.
Which one that looked like either someone had this middle finger up. He was either going to or looking from wine bottle. I don't know which one it was.
I guess I'm not sure what the question was, but more so just again, how much time do you dedicate to that part? Some of those, when you had them on screen, I was like, they're so intricate and beautiful. Like, how often do you want people to kind of magnify them or use them or see them in more than just kind of a small instance?
I think these, in some cases they're useful, but in most cases they're useless sort of things that you just add into it. And it's definitely a way that you can add story to the project. And the glyph set or the standard letters and everything can only convey so much. So I think it's fun to always explore what else you can put into it, small little Easter eggs or something like that into it. So I've always enjoyed working on them, and it's also handy for when you're presenting the typeface, and creating specimens or something like that. It's a way of sort of selling the whole story or narrative of the project.
Just conscious of time, not to keep throwing up. I know a few of us have to kind of get moving. I know.
Yeah, no problem. It's past 7 hours or 6 your time.
Yeah, but really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
I think that was one of my favourites that we've had. So,
cheers. That's really encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Yeah,
podcast coming soon.
Nice to meet you all. Thanks for inviting me to speak again. It's been great. So
if you're ever in London,
enjoy it. Yes. I should do that.
Well, nice to meet you. Have a great evening.
Okay, nice to meet you all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.